Okay, welcome everybody to this event for Black History Month. My name's Yasmin Khan and I'm a Fellow and Vice President of Kellogg College. To those of you who are new to Kellogg, just to welcome you in particular to the college, we have a history in part-time and graduate education, but we do have full-time students now too at Kellogg. And every year we celebrate and think about Black History Month with a lecture, a public lecture. And we also have this exhibition that I'm sure many of you have been able to see, which is about the history of black women in Oxford and Cambridge. And this is a really interesting exhibition which has been curated and researched by, initially by students at Kellogg. And so this is original research, which you may not find anywhere else. It's my absolute pleasure this evening to welcome Professor Uzo Iwobi, who is the Chief Executive of Race Council Cymru. And she's going to be speaking about overcoming barriers and achieving your full potential. So Professor Iwobi is a lawyer, an anti-racist practitioner, a champion of adult learning and professional development, and that makes her particularly suited to coming to Kellogg, where we have that history of adult learning. She arrived in the UK in 1993 and is going to be speaking about experiences of racism and overcoming obstacles. She was the first Black African Commissioner to the Commission on Racial Equality, has been policy advisor to the Welsh Government on inequality, and was also a trustee to the Universities Association for Lifelong Learning. I'll also mention the Centenary Commission for Lifelong Learning, which was also joined by our president, Jonathan Mickey, and which was sponsored by Kellogg College. So thank you very much for coming, Professor, and we very much look forward to hearing you speak. There'll be a question and answer at the end, which I will chair, and so please do think of questions that you'd like to put to Professor Iwobi.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you all here. I've come all the way from Wales today. Shwmae, shwdach chi heddi. I'm speaking a little bit of Welsh, and that means hello, how are you? And how are you today? So thank you so much, Yasmin, for that lovely introduction. And what an honor to be here. A big thank you to the President, Professor Jonathan Mickey. And he asked me to share my personal journey through this concept of Black history. I think we're different in Wales because I oversee the work of the Black History Management Committee, and it's a movement of about 137 organizations, including the National Museums of Wales, all 8 of them, the Wales Millennium Centre, Welsh Government partners. And so we've got mainstream partnerships as well as diverse ethnic Africans, African Caribbeans, and a variety of others. It's been a journey and a half, as you can imagine, to get so many different people together. But we have got a strategy from our consultation that says that Black history should not just be for 1 month. So the task for Kellogg's University is to join Wales in saying Black History Cymru 365. So every day should be Black history, because we say in Wales that Black history is Welsh history. You cannot effectively talk about Black history in Wales without including the contributions of Black people. You can't talk about Welsh history without talking about the inventions of Black people of Wales. You can't talk about education in Wales without talking about the first Black headmistress who was told by her teachers, you should be very lucky if you graduate from school. You will certainly never be a school teacher, not to talk about head teacher. So get those dreams out of your head. Well, she smashed through triple glazed ceilings. She became a teacher. She became a first Black head teacher and single-handedly introduced Black history in her classroom, to the annoyance of many parents, as you can imagine, because she was running her own curriculum on top of the main national curriculum. But those are some change makers. I want to give you a little overview of my own journey. Can I just check with Prof, how long do I have? Because I can talk. Okay, so stop me when the time is right, because I haven't got my phone. Okay, so How many of us go to a doctor's surgery? Hands up if you, yeah? How many of you have ever had a doctor's stethoscope put on your heart? That is a black invention. Did you know? A black man invented the stethoscope. So I'm in Oxford. Go do your research. And what about those who have been in an elevator in a shop? That is a black invention. How many people know that a black man invented the traffic light system? Yeah? The lawnmower, the lawn sprinkler, a comb, a doorknob, the fountain pen was a black invention. And also peanut butter, for those of us who like peanuts, like me. Okay, so there are many things that people use on a day-to-day basis. I've got this list of about 74 items with the names of the black people who invented them. And the fact that, you know, so many black activists and contributors and inventors, they've been written out of history. You know, so many people have been written out. Their stories are totally forgotten. I relate as a daughter to a mother to one of the most remarkable Windrush elders in Wales called Mrs. Vanessa Cyril. She came from St. Lucia when she was 15 years old. And she came to as part of the Windrush, and she arrived in Wales and trained to be a nurse. She wanted to be a midwife. She has delivered over 2,000 Welsh babies in all her years, and she was known as the one midwife who could tackle difficult pregnancies. And she was put in the most difficult and challenging cases, one of which was a remarkable man. Before I tell you who, in 2009, she was awarded the most outstanding midwife for the whole of the UK, voted by the Nursing Union. And she received her award here in England. And 2023, she had a tap on her shoulders and turned round to see Sir Trevor McDonald, who said to her, "Vanessa, I am here to surprise you." She's in her 80s, totally unexpected. They took her back to Gwent General, the hospital where she served in Newport in Wales. And they'd unveiled a plaque about her life and her contribution. She was almost in tears, and he said, I'm delighted to invite you to receive the Pride of Britain Award. And she was going to go to this wonderful celebration in England with all the Prime Minister and everybody else and meet some of the people she had birthed. They had tracked them down. And so when she was being presented with this award, she was on stage and they said to her, "Look forward." And she was looking, and behind her lined up a number of top people that she had birthed. And one of them tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Mrs. Vanessa, I'm one of your babies." And she turned round. Guess who it was? Michael Sheen, the actor. I'm sure that you have seen some of the plays, but that is Black history. Often we talk about just the negative aspects of what is going on in our lives, but I do think there is great power in looking within ourselves and actually celebrating what white people do, what Black people do, what Asian people do, and working together as brothers and sisters, holding hands in this world that humanity is very much lacking in the behaviors of some people who I or you may have encountered. So my story is just starting, Prof. I'm sure I've taken up a long time telling you about Wales, but I can't come all this way without telling you about myself. So I was born to a very academic family. My dad was a professor of crop science, and my mother was the first female head teacher in Eastern Nigeria. She was 24 when she became a principal, a head teacher of a school. She grew up in a very poor family, and in her village, they didn't believe in the education of women. She remembered begging her mother to let her go to school. Her father was a polygamist, and her mother had lost 7 children in the womb before she was born, and healthy. So by 6 years old, after much pestering, she was sent off to walk miles on bare feet. They couldn't afford shoes. And she remembers the story of how her uncle, who was a tailor, stitched bits and pieces from somebody's leftover fabric to make her first underpants. She tells that story with pride. It's a bit like Jacob with the multicolored coat. She was so determined. She said, I marched off. I didn't have a book, but I had a little cardboard that I could write with a chalk. What can you remember at 6 going on 7? But she walked and she walked and she walked. And later on, she said to me, it became a joy. I was determined to be an educator because I felt that women needed to be informed about life in general. And her work was outstanding. My mother's result, her report card never scored a B in her life. She was an A-star student. And every time she earned her money, her father would say, bring all your salary, all of it. He would take it and go and drink with his friends. In Nigeria, it was quite male dominated. A lot of men determine what will happen to the fate of women, and she wasn't an exception. Then she married the absolutely young, handsome, dashing doctor who came from a totally different family. My father's family were from the royal family in our village in Udi, local government. His parents died when he was very young and suddenly was thrust out from where he lived into fending for his siblings. And again, his father was polygamous. So he served and lived with an Irish priest who paid for his education, but also gave him a small stipend, which he sent home to the village to enable his sister feed the family. And all he wanted was to educate all the family, for everybody to get an education. Now, Nigeria is not like the UK, where you have income support, where you have benefits, where you have all those things. None of those. You had to pay for your education from kindergarten, nursery school, right through to university. So if you didn't have a degree, you were going to struggle. Unfortunately, because of the economic system, very few people can actually afford to go to school. So this Kellogg College is very well known for its commitment to adult learning. This is why I'm so passionate to come and support the work that Professor Miki and all of you here are doing, because that was exactly the experience of my family. My father remembered fighting and working so hard to afford to pay for his immediate family to go to school. And when they graduated, he'd allocate 3 people for you who are already adults to go into a primary school and start to learn alphabets and do all that. So you can imagine having 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. He said to us as we were very little, you have to do a professional degree. And that meant you had to be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, an accountant, an architect. You couldn't be anything else. So learning English, which was what I wanted to do, and teach English, he didn't think was a career at all. He said, Uzo, you can talk a lot, so you must be a lawyer. Go and study law. And that was how we were all chaperoned into courses, whether you wanted it or not. But he couldn't raise 5 children on the salary of a junior lecturer at the time. He was a crop scientist. So he passed a scholarship examination, which Nigerian government had put out at the time, to be educated in any university of his choice in America. My mother also passed. So we were raised for about 5.5 years by my mother's mother. So both parents went off to California, to Riverside University, where they qualified, got their 4 degrees, got their, my dad became a professor and served in the Senate. And he wanted to transform crop science in Nigeria, because Nigerian temperature is so hot that we on average have 38 degrees on most days. Now in Wales, we love talking about the weather. What kind of weather is it today? Oh my gosh, it's freezing. Oh, the cold, it seeps into your bones. Everybody meets you and talks about the weather. In Nigeria, you're guaranteed hot climate, and you never talk about the weather. The problem is how you're going to get out of the sunshine that's roasting you and cooking you like bacon. So it was interesting that my dad wanted to learn agriculture to transform lives for farmers, because he said to me that the tomato would rot in the fields before they were harvested. And when he was in America, he realized that the aubergine was also a fruit, a vegetable, but the skin was so thick, it couldn't be easily penetrated. So the inside content was secure. So he got the gene from the aubergine and put it into the gene of the tomato and made the color yet red. So it was thicker skin on a tomato, so it didn't rot. And he had a UN award for that and a variety of other things he did. My dad was an academic to the core. He believed in education. And by the time he died, he had helped to educate and start up businesses for 183 human beings that we've counted. It's incredible. I don't know how he did it. He was always poor because he didn't believe he should keep any money. It was always going to help someone else. So when I grew up in that environment, he said, never ever allow somebody to define who you are going to be. You and God define who you're going to be. Never allow any barriers stand in your way. The barriers are there to be challenged and to be overcome. And he said, coming from what I came from, you've had an easy life. I've educated all of you. So all you have to do is rise and shine. And I remember his words. Sadly, he passed in 2015, and nothing hit me as hard as the death of my dad, because he was such a towering figure in our family. And to watch all that education, all that wisdom, all that knowledge just go down, it was the most painful experience. But such is death, and so we must cherish the life that we do. And I'll share some of the lessons he shared with me. He said, let there always be a before Uzo and an after Uzo. He said, don't let people wipe the sands of your footsteps away from the shore. Your footsteps must make an indelible mark wherever you put your feet. He was such an incredible man. And I had that attitude when I studied law. And I met the most wonderful husband in the universe, Andrew. He's a mixed heritage, and his mother is Jewish, English, white. Met a Nigerian, fell in love and got on a ship. Came to Nigeria and stayed for 52 years. She loved Nigeria, spoke our language, ate our food, dressed in our African outfits like what I'm wearing, and tied our headscarf. She looked stunning with a posh English accent. She spoke our language. So, she's 92, back home with us in Wales today. So when I joined, I got married to Andrew. I came to the UK. I had qualified as a barrister and a solicitor. My parents raised 2 doctors who are now consultants, 1 lawyer, 1 engineer, my brother, and my other sister who's an accountant. They did very well. But once you graduated, they allocated 3 people for you to educate and help on. And as soon as they graduated, you were to assign 3 more. And that is how we educate everybody and give people the chance in life. Because he said, if all around you is poor, you're surrounded by poverty. 1, you will never have peace to enjoy the fruits of your labor. They'll keep stealing from you. So why not give them the tools to make something of their lives? And also, when you thrive with your brothers and sisters, you thrive together. So there was that holistic philanthropic element of his life that is really important to mention. So you can imagine me, newly called to the Nigerian bar, married to the most wonderful man in the world, and he was lecturing at the Swansea Law School. I thought I'd come here and practice law. Arrived in Swansea on my birthday, 7th February 1993. What a shock I had in Heathrow. In Nigeria, we were told this was the land flowing with milk and honey. Everywhere was spotless. You couldn't see dirt anywhere. Have you been to Heathrow? There was junk everywhere. People throw bits of chocolate wrappers, and I was so shocked. And then I'd never, because Nigeria is so large in size, we have 360 registered languages, not dialects, different languages. So the colonial masters who colonized Nigeria insisted that we all had to speak English and study in English so they could hear when we were planning to overthrow them. And it was interesting that most Nigerians, we would speak in English because either you're Yoruba or you're Hausa or something. So we had the land size of Nigeria, according to the National Geographics, is add Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, and 4 times over. I had never seen terraced property before. So when I saw a long row of houses with doors, I genuinely thought they're obsessed with doors in the UK. Why do you have so many colored doors? Every day you decide which door you'll use to get into your house. My husband said, no, each door is a separate house. Well, I had a lot of learning. I was a barrister, but not open. I'd never left Nigeria. So all my experiences were limited to that. So going to the job center in April of that year to start looking for a job, because I had these 3 people waiting to go to school, I was shocked to meet the job advisor. She said, sorry, what's your name? I said, Uzo. Right. How do you say that? I said, Uzo. Uzo is from Uzo Amaka, which means the doorway of blessing. It's a Nigerian Igbo name. I can't say that. Do you have an English name? I said, well, I was baptized a Linda, but I'm a Pentecostal Christian, so I'm not a Catholic like my parents. Well, you better be a Linda. You'll get on if you're a Linda. We can't say these words in this place. So I came in and Uzo, I left a Linda. And she said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I was called to the bar. I want to practice law. Can you help me? She looked at my certificate. She said, wow, you did really well in school. I said, thank you. You will never get a job in the legal profession because you're black. Straight up. My jaw hit the floor. I think I was so shocked because you can imagine growing up in the kind of culture I grew up. There was hardly anybody different. Well, apart from my mother-in-law, who we all loved, absolutely loved her to bits. And I was shocked to hear somebody in my face telling me, you can't get a job because of your skin color. I said, what do you mean? She said, nobody will recruit a black person. I said, why not? Because you're black. They won't want somebody black working for them. And secondly, you'll stand out. And nobody wants somebody to stand out. They want you to fit in. I said, so it's not about my qualification. She said, no, no, no. So I said, what do you advise me to do? She said, listen, you have done very well with your GCSEs, loads of A's, loads of B's. You need to forget that you're a lawyer, forget your bar qualification and get a job on the shop floor. I said, really? She said, yeah, because if you tell them you're a qualified barrister, you're called to the Nigerian bar, all the stuff you told me, they won't give you a job. Because they'll say you're overqualified. They're going to train you. You're going to leave. So that was the beginning of the journey. I did 55 applications. I photocopied my call to bar, my law degree qualifications, because in Nigeria it's a fused profession. You're qualified as a solicitor and a barrister. But because we were once colonized, our legal systems are the same as the UK. So you can quickly do a transfer test and practice here. So it was going to be very straightforward for me. I went round. I applied even up to Bristol. I had one invitation to do an interview. And I apologized to Professor Johnson because he'd heard this bit of my story and his student, SJ, before. And honestly, this man invited me, a Welshman who owned a law firm in St. James Gardens. And he interviewed me on a civil procedure job. I was not asked one question on civil procedure. It was criminal law, environmental law, the legal theory of law, jurisprudence. And we went round the shop for 1.5 hours. I couldn't afford the bus fare which I had to use to come to that interview, because Andrew was feeding all of us. His mom and dad were living with us, so it was very difficult. On a salary at that time, I think they were only on about 16,000 a year. Lecturers newly starting, it was really difficult. So this man finished. He said, "Gosh, you're very, very smart." I said, "Thank you. Does that mean I get the job?" "Oh, no. I just wanted to know what they teach you in those countries in the name of law." I said, "So I was just an experiment." He said, "No, I just wanted to know, because they say, oh, Commonwealth nations, learn this, learn that. But it's lovely meeting you. Let me give you one tip. You have a strong Nigerian accent." I said, "Okay." Now, my accent hasn't changed from when I came to now. I would have had a Welsh twang if it was going to change. And I think I speak English that all of you can understand. Well, he said to me, "You need to acclimatize yourself and get a bit of Welsh lingo and sound more Welsh." I said, "Really? How do I do that?" "Well, you can mix with people, go to classes, learn how we talk here." I said, "Right." So off I was. That was the only opportunity I had. I tell you what, my first job was going back to that job center, seeing that particular woman and asking her what to do. I was at my tether's end. I didn't want to sign up on the dole. I was having those letters from Nigeria saying, "Auntie, we pray to God that you will get your job quickly so we can go to school. Please hurry up, go to school." Pressure. So my first job was working in Toys R Us, selling toys, £2.40 an hour. And it wasn't enough. 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Do the maths. I got another job late at night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., £3.60, working in a crisp factory, packing Walker's factory. How many of you eat cheese and onions? Oh, no, don't. It is the worst smell on earth. I cannot touch crisps at all. I cannot see it. Sorry if you have shares in Walker's. I just blew your cover. Honestly, the smell of cheese and onions, you could smell it from miles. And we had to wear this hairnet, and we had to wear those chunky boots and march into the factory every evening into the morning. And myself and one black Zimbabwean lady were the only black people in the whole factory of about 400 workers. And no white person wanted to do what they called the VAT duty. And this is literally where they pick you up and throw you into this oily, greasy vat full of the gunge from cheese and onion. The crisps come out grey, and then they spray color on it, and then they spray the fat on it, and then they wrap it up, and we have to box them up. It was awful. So the white people didn't want to do it, so we had to scrape out all the gunge and use this chemical to clean the tureen so that the tastes don't transfer if you're doing salt and vinegar next. Oh my gosh, I was heavily pregnant. I was a size 10, so you couldn't imagine. What happened to me? I gave up mangoes and I started eating Ferrero Rochers. That's what happened to me. Terrible. I'm trying to get back mangoes and guavas and give up Ferrero Rochers. It's been a tough job. So I was size 10. I didn't look pregnant. So my friend said, "Don't tell anybody you're pregnant because they'll get rid of you. Nobody wants to pay maternity leave." So I was very heavily pregnant, being thrown into this vat, sweating buckets, then climbing ladders, being asked to carry this box of toys, and I dared not tell anybody I was expecting. I did this vat duty every single morning, night into the morning for about 6 months. And I said to myself, I am going to die here one day. I said to my friend Izzy, I said, "I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm challenging this because it's racist." She said, "Oh, don't make trouble. They're going to fire you and fire me." I said, "Well, it's your choice. I'm done." I said, I'm up to here. So she said, well, don't add my name to the complaint. I said, fine. So I put my hand up. Yes, Linda, come up here. I said, excuse me, can I ask why you always put us on VAT duty every single night? Just me in this place, VAT duty every night. The white people get to be moved around, and some card crisps, some box the crisps. Why don't we get that job? Is it because I'm black and there's a tannoy? You can only speak through a tannoy because the machines are going. Excuse me? Are you calling us racist? Come up here at once, Linda, you troublemaker. And that went round the whole factory. So you can imagine the shock. So up I went, I marched, I thought, I can't. I'm going to kill myself, kill my child, and I'm not going to do it. So I went up. She said, you look like a troublemaker. Why are you causing trouble in this factory? I said, no, but every night you change duties. He said, so ideally, madam, what did you want to do? I said, I want to sit down and card bacon crisps. Sit down, card it all night. That's what some people are doing. Why do I have to do this every night? The white people aren't sent to do it with us. Why not? Well, we're not racist, I'll have you know. I said, I never said, I asked a question. Right, if you go and finish the shift tonight, I'll see what I can do tomorrow. And stop causing trouble. Thank you, sir. Down I went. The next day, I was on carding crisps. And my friend was, why didn't you tell them about me? But you know, this is how life is. Sometimes it takes a lot to step out of raise your head above the parapet, but you might have it shot to pieces. That's the sad truth about confronting unfair practices. And I've always been that kind of a person. Remember, my dad said, before Uzo and after Uzo, be absolutely unforgettable. So within the first year of my working in Toys R Us, I won the best employee of the year. And it was a 25 pound gift voucher to East in Castellamare. Now, nobody told me that that was a very expensive restaurant, and each meal was about 40 pounds. So we ended up in debt by going to eat with that voucher. But you know, I was determined to be the best at whatever I did. My journey through life became even tougher when the children came. And just to finish off the Toys R Us story, I left on the 17th of January, locked up my till. The next thing they heard, my husband called and said, Linda is not coming to work today. She's just had a baby. Can you imagine the state of the face of my manager? She nearly died. She said, which Linda? My wife, she said. You mean she's been pregnant all this time? Climbing ladders, lifting boxes? She was speechless. But that's what many of us have to do to make a living and to make sure that we're not letting the side down and we're doing our best and we're retained. Real challenging times. You have doctors today who are sweeping the roads, trying to finish their qualification. You have neurologists who I met last week, 2 of them from Afghanistan, doing menial jobs, but they're trying to live in safety. It can be quite a challenge. So my experience is worsened because one of my friends, her son, who was an athlete and a top performer in Mountain Ash 4 years ago, was taken by a group of white young children in Wales and pushed into the Mountain Ash River, and he drowned. He was telling them, I can't swim, I can't swim. The man who pushed him in was a competitive, the next best to him, a white boy who said, you are a chicken and you're a big lily-livered, kind of words to that effect. Don't be a wimp, you're getting in. He said, I can't swim, I don't want to go in. They took his glasses, took his shoes and pushed him in. He drowned. Do you know that when he was asked, I sat in the courtroom and I heard the boy testify and lie through so much that he was traveling at such a speed, his shoulder bumped into this child and he fell in. So the defense solicitor said, so why was your velocity of travel so powerful as to push someone in, but you were standing still where you were? How did that happen? Oh, I don't know. And then his report, when the police arrested him, went to his house, was it was my left shoulder. Then on that day, it was my right shoulder. So he couldn't tell which shoulder it was that had pushed this boy, 13-year-old athlete who was in the prime of his youth, to his death. Do you know the interesting thing? Even though the boy who did it was identified by the 15 odd white kids in that mix, the police said, we are not going to prosecute because it is not in the public interest to prosecute a white boy. Till today, that boy's death has never seen justice, and the mother campaigns a bit like Stephen Lawrence's mother. Only earlier part of this year, a 14-year-old Asian boy was locked in a toilet in Cardiff and pounded by 4 white boys. I saw a video that was sent to my phone of a 14-year-old boy who was pulled to the side of his school by 4 white kids and told to kneel down by the roadside. They said, your ancestors were slaves, so you will lick the base of my boot. They stuck their feet up and said, lick the bottom of my shoes. He tried to lick around. They said, no, underneath, like a dog. And this boy knelt and licked the base of the boots of 3 white boys from his school. And they said, now we will see you tomorrow for more lessons on respect. A mother had that video sent to them because their son was in a group that was circulating, and he said, I'm not going to be a party to what is happening. Reported it to his father. I had the WhatsApp message at 6:30 in the morning, and this man said to me, I haven't slept. This is horrific what I've seen. I sent it to the chief constable of Gwent Police. I said, this is unacceptable. These lives are at risk. And it was David Olusoga who said that racism is trauma. And children who are exposed to consistent evidence of racism develop long-term trauma, mental health issues, stress, and difficulties through childhood and into adulthood. So a number of things that I could tell you have shaken me to the core, but I've also seen the wonderful relationship between white and black. My friendship and respect, professional respect for Professor Mickey, who treats me like his little sister. It is wonderful. It is brilliant to see such an accomplished man make time to invest in me and my own development and to give me opportunities to share a space, because that's what allyship is, sharing a space, opening doors for people. I have lovely friends who are white. In fact, my prayer partner is a white English girl who lives in Swansea. We share the biggest secrets. There's no secret that we wouldn't share. We share that camaraderie. She shares my passion for justice, and I share her passion for all things artists and looking at beautiful exhibitions, art exhibitions. We go to all sorts of places together, and we're very different. I'm as hurricane-like as she is a quiet, still, beautiful, still stream. But we work so well together. I've seen white people stand in the face of injustice and challenge it. So things are moving on. And for us in Wales, the remarkable thing is, a few years down the line, I did a number of jobs, one of which was interviewing to represent the 43 police forces in the UK and respond to ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers, and criticize their race equality schemes on the responses to Stephen Lawrence's death and the way the police had to change to ensure that they learned lessons about institutional racism and drove out systemic racism. Is the journey over? Far from it. We're still taking steps every day towards equity. And then I served as a commissioner to the Commission for Racial Equality. And I was appointed by Ruth Kelly, who was the then Home Secretary, and Trevor Phillips was the then chair. We've sadly lost Lord Herman Ousley, who was one of the greats in the commission. He was the first black commissioner appointed to that commission. And the changes that these people achieved were phenomenal. I remembered being invited to the Westminster Palace during my time as a commissioner, and they opened the old part of the Westminster Palace, which at the time was under reconstruction and repair. But they had marked out the space where William Wilberforce stood to read out the Emancipation speech, and they said I was invited to speak as the one African, black African on the commission. So I stood in that spot. It was mind blowing, and I looked out in front of me. I said, you know, I have a sobering thought, because in front of me was Baroness Amos, who was the then first black female leader of the House of Lords. And in front of me was Sir Trevor McDonald's, and of course a variety of other well-known people like the guy who acts Patrick in EastEnders, for those who watch EastEnders. Some of those big actors were there. And I said to them, do you know the most incredible thing? That 200 years as we mark the bicentenary of the abolition of slave trade, most of my ancestors would never have been allowed into this place. And I speak about the work and life of Olaudah Equiano, who was traced to be a slave taken from southeastern Nigeria. And I said he would never have been allowed to come in. And if he came in, he would have been in chains. And today I see in front of me leaders in the House of Lords who are black like me. I think we have to acknowledge that we have come a long way. There is still so much work to do, which I think in Wales we've done significantly more than in England. I'm sorry to say, Prof and everybody, because I was interviewed successfully to be the first black African person to be a specialist advisor to the First Minister in Wales. The First Minister, and I worked directly with the Minister for Social Justice, Jane Hutt, one of the most inspirational women I have had the joy and honor of serving. And together, do you know what they did? They heard my story. They went round, Jane Hutt went round and did, goodness knows, probably just under 30 Zooms, met loads of people, professors of law, professors of medicine, grassroots asylum seekers, refugees, who told stories of the devastating impact of racism on their lives. And she said, I cannot unsee what I have seen or unhear what I've heard. Now, all I can do is, within the time I have, to drive change, to ensure that we have a fairer and an inclusive Wales. And she led the work to publish the first anti-racism action plan in Wales that is mandatory for all public service bodies to embed anti-racism. And First Minister Mark Drakeford said, I want to see an anti-racist Wales by 2030. He's the first European leader to say that. Secondly, they enshrined in law in Wales the fact that Black history must be taught in every single school across the whole of Wales by force. And I'm so excited to say that my children can hear of the positive contributions of Black people, because all teachers do is put up pictures of Black people in chains. There was Africa before the enslavement of Africans. What was happening to people like Mansa Musa, the richest man in the world, that Europeans came on camelbacks to borrow money from this man in Mali? What about the pyramids? What about the hieroglyphics? I can't speak now. Sorry. But you know, the pyramids, the mathematics of Egypt. This is North Africa. What about the Benin Empire, the Benin Bronze? We were developed, certainly, in our own way, but the whole thing that you hear now is all about how people were barbarians in Africa and how we all had to be captured and educated. And you think about in honor of Professor Johnson here, the Zulus, the KwaZulu Natal. I tested him. He's partly from South Africa. And the way that they use their assegais and shields to stop the advancement of the empire in taking over their land, and they retain their language. So there's so much we could talk about Black history. But these leaders in Wales decided in their time they had to put markers on the ground. Now, before I finish, I want to tell you one last story. And this story is a story of a woman called Patty Flynn. I met her when she was 80. She always said, don't call me Auntie Patty, because everybody teaches you back home in Nigeria. If you're older, whether you're white, black, pink, we call you Auntie. Is a mark of respect. I don't think I've ever called Professor by his name. I call him Prof all the time because you're taught to show respect. And Patty always said, call me Patty, I'm too young to be an auntie. She was 80. She says, Shirley Bassey sang with me, not I sang with Shirley Bassey. She was called the diva, jazz diva of Tiger Bay. Fierce woman. And she told me of her 26 years campaign to correct a historic injustice, that all the 5 male members of her family, her father, her grandfather, her 2 brothers and her uncle, all served and died in the wars. Her younger brother left at 23. He was in the Royal Air Force, a pilot, and he was killed as they were coming out of one of the operations. Now, when those who survived came back to Cardiff, there was an MOD, Ministry of Defence rule, that only the white comrades could march and take the salute into town. If you were from the Commonwealth and Allied nations out, only the white Welsh, white English, white Scottish that came back to Wales could march and take the salute. So you were good enough to die, but you were not good enough to be acknowledged by your community. I was appalled to hear this story. And I wrote to the then First Minister of Wales. I said, I want you to issue a national apology to people like Patty. She said 200 people from Butetown lost all the male members of their family. She said, I was only 7 and I sat on the stairs watching my brothers go. I never saw any of them back, and we had to stand back, watch all of them separated and the white ones march. And she said, nowhere in Wales will you see a monument that says thank you to my ancestors. That is wrong. 26 years she campaigned for a monument. It happened to be the time I was a specialist policy advisor, and I went into the minister one day. We had tried everything to get the stone installed. Nothing. Promises were made and broken. And the minister was having her sandwich. I remember her sandwich with the carrot, which was interesting. And she had her newspaper. She always did that every lunchtime. I said, Minister, please, can I just interrupt you with a personal matter? It's not usual, I'm sorry, but I got to ask you. Look at what's happening with this elderly lady. She's in her 80s. She hasn't got long on this earth. She has fought on her own. Can you help with the installation of a monument for all the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic servicemen and women from the Commonwealth? She said, I'm shocked. I've never heard of her work. I've never heard of her, her attempts to get this injustice. She said, leave it with me. And she pulled her phone, typed in a little text and said, we'll see what happens. 2 days later, I had an email. Come and pick the spot. That is making space. That is true allyship. And I said, not me, Patty. I said, Patty, where are you? She said, I'm in my gym jams on my bed. I said, put on your shawl and put on your coat and come to the field. She nearly died. She was sobbing, crying. I didn't know what she was doing. She had this leopard thick jacket that she put on and came in the taxi, came out looking like the Queen of Sheba. And she said, we picked the spot. I said, you can pick the spot. She said, anywhere. I said, anywhere. Honestly, the joy on her face was beyond. She ran around the field. She was just incredible, full of energy. And she ran around the field and picked the spot. She said, I think from here they could look around and see the national monument and then be close by. This will do, Uzo. I said, fine, you choose the words that'll be carved into the stone. So I got people to donate towards it, the Royal Commonwealth Society, the Royal British Legion, the Masons, the Cardiff Council, Race Council, my charity, our charity. And then that monument was unveiled. She stood with the daughter of Betty Campbell, the first black headmistress, and pulled the blue cloth off that monument. And we cried and we cheered and we laughed. It was incredible. Literally 1 year before, we were getting ready for the 1 year anniversary. And Patty called me and said, I've written my speech, but I won't be here to give it. I said, what do you mean? She said, I've been diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer and I have literally weeks to live. I could not believe my ears. She didn't live to see the first anniversary. Had it not been for Jane Hart and her quick action, that woman's work for what would be 28 years of campaigning would have ended in vain. So I'm asking people in this room, you have a lot of power. What will you do with the power that you have? Either students, use your pen. As lecturers, make room, be a good ally. And remember that Black history has to be 365. Don't start just in a month, push everything away after a month. We continue to live and thrive together. But I thank you for listening, and I hope we can really make changes to be brothers and sisters in this world and mark our footsteps in the sands of time. Thank you very much for inviting me. And diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you'll join me in thanking Uzo for that incredibly inspirational and colourful and terrific speech. I think there'll be a lot of questions here. So please just feel free to ask a question, and the floor is open. There's a microphone circulating, so if you want to ask, if you can just wait for the microphone to reach you, because there are people going to be listening to this online as well.
I'll make a start, shall I? Thank you very much. That was fantastic. We had a coffee before your talk, and it was so inspiring. I thought I'd come this evening for a second round. It was wonderful. I said as you were leaving St. Anthony's earlier today that I visit Nigeria and do quite a lot of work there. And on my last visit to a lovely state called Akwa Ibom, with Mo Edifeso, who's a very senior person, whose doctorate I examined at the University of London, she approached me at lunchtime and asked me a rather interesting question, never been asked this before. She said, David, she said, are you a white man? I said, Mo, how dare you ask such a silly question, and why are you asking it? She says, oh, it's just that the hotel staff wanted to know whether the white man is joining us for lunch. And so I thought it was really rather curious, but it brings up this question of identity and how we try and understand it. And as you pointed out earlier, my mother was a young South African Zulu woman who fell in love with a refugee from Germany, a Jewish refugee, and I was the result of a marriage that, well, not a marriage, but a relationship that could never be recognized in apartheid South Africa. So a story that I continue to work on and write. But apart from writing that, very struck by, and this is really the question, and although much progress has been made in this country and elsewhere over many years to try and address questions of the past, and many victories have been won. It is rather sad, and I'll be doing a seminar on the 25th of October at St. Anthony's. One of the sessions, which I've cheekily entitled Toppling Statues and Tearing Up Statutes, which explores really the contradiction of victories won, particularly in the United States and Europe, how we address colonialism and racism, but at the same time, this rapid rise, frightening rise of right-wing populism. And in fact, when we look at the United States and indeed Europe, rapid legislation where statutes of hard-fought victories won are literally being torn up in favor of new statutes that undermine equality, diversity, and inclusion, that undermine and erase many of the histories of hard-won struggles. I just wondered whether you might reflect on where you ended tonight, that yes, progress has been made, but there is a real threat that the statutes of the progress that have been made are at risk of being torn up as Europe lurches more and more, very quickly, very rapidly, to the right.
Thank you so much. That's a really powerful and interesting question. I think that something interesting happened, especially during the death of George Floyd. There was a seismic shift in consciousness of the true value of a black man. And I think that caused a lot of people to rage and to allow the rage within them to come very much to the surface. And I think that there was a lot of, let's destroy everything that tells a story of domination, of conquest, and of terror. Let's topple the statues. Let's shred the statute books. I think from my perspective, I understand that rage and I understand that view. I probably would say let's reframe the historical narratives and not glorify the terrorists and the racists who have so far dominated the history books. Let's tell the real stories of what they did. In fact, in Wales, I was suggesting to them that they should have a museum for the unglorified and put all these torn down statues into there and put a story and a narrative into why they have been displaced, because people were campaigning and seriously pushing for the removal of some of these contradictory historical figures. And, you know, statutes have, I mean, for example, the Equality Act of 2010 brought together 115 different pieces of legislation that individually addressed different things. Now, is the Equality Act fully comprehensive and inclusive and covers all areas of law that we would like to see as equality practitioners? Absolutely not. I think it's watered down a lot. But sadly, you're right. In trying to bring things together, we're losing the very essence of what, for example, the Race Relations Act of 65, then 76, then amendment in 2000, and then subsequent amendments talking about the duty to promote good race relations is now removed from statute. So it's unfortunate, because I do think those general duties under the Race Relations Act would be so powerfully helpful. Now you have something called the duty to promote relations, which we insisted in the Commission for Racial Equality had to be in the Equality Act, but it doesn't quite capture the way it was written in the Race Relations Act. But I think part of their rationale was that you didn't have an LGBTQAI legislation of the same note. So why treat some strands of protected characteristics differently from others? So the question is, do we all continue in different strands, or do we try bringing people together? And in bringing people together or bringing legislation together, do you lose and water down some of what you have done? And I think we are where we are. Statues have toppled, and stories are being reframed. And in Wales, they talk about decolonizing the curriculum and telling the true story of the racist history and the impact of adverse impact of enslavement on the lives of slaves and their descendants. So there is a really painful truth to encounter and to look at with courage. And I think it's adult learning actually that enables us to take that conversation forward. People who are in the learning sphere today, people who are leading current learning that could draw appropriate attention to those very important topics. And I don't think there is one answer that is correct. If you talk to another Black person, I'm sure they'll have a completely different opinion to myself, but that's how I see it.
There's a mic coming to you, I think.
Thanks. Thanks. Oh, good. I'd like to talk a little about Wales.
Yeah.
It's not a country that I know particularly well, but what I do know is the direct result of my father-in-law, who is a Sikh, or was a Sikh, moving to Cardiff and settling down there. He was a peddler and a fortune teller, and found that the Cardiff docks was an eminently suitable place for him to operate, although later on he moved out and made an absolute fortune, so much so that his family came over and a lot of his other relatives came over, like hundreds of others, other Sikh families that came over to Cardiff. And talking to these people, the overwhelming impression that I have to say I get is these people, who most of whom have been brought up in Cardiff, were very glad of the fact that their parents moved over to Wales, because their experience has been overwhelmingly positive. Now, I'd like to know the reasons for that. I suspect there's something very distinctive about Welsh culture, that something very distinctive about that certainly distinguishes it from an English and perhaps a Scottish culture. But there is something about a shared experience of oppression with the Wales. There is an experience of industrial labour, a very powerful culture, and so on and so forth. So the point here is that the stories that you tell, and some of the stories that you've told, are horrific. But there are other stories that could well be told about Welsh culture and race, which are rather more positive.
Oh, many. Absolutely many. I think you're totally correct. I mean, Cardiff, the Bute Town area, which was the former Tiger Bay, is one of the most cosmopolitan and diverse parts of, I guess, the whole of the UK. You had people from Somali, you had the Yemeni seafarers, Nigerian seafarers, you had the Jews who were predominantly there, you had Sikhs, you had people from India who migrated to that part of the world. Is really, really buzzing with diversity and inclusion. And I don't disbelieve what you're saying. There's so many people with positive stories of a warm and a welcome. I think when you meet individuals, you have to prepare yourself to go on the journey of their lives. And my journey is very, very different. And I think because of the work I do through Race Council Cymru, we're minded to hear most of the bad stories. And because we're an anti-racist charity. So people who phone our helplines often don't phone to tell us good news. They're often calling to tell us their children have been abused, their children have been targeted. Like I said, I've had some incredibly wonderful experiences, and I wouldn't want us to go away thinking that Wales is racist and everybody's racist and it's all about negativity, because it isn't. I wouldn't dwell in that darkness for so long. We have pockets of wickedness, as you do in all societies. I'm sure in England, in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, everywhere you go, you have all sorts of people. The activities of the far right have increased, especially following the Stockport incident. There was a lot of hate directed because the Rwandan parents of the alleged perpetrator is still going through court, so we don't know what the findings will be, though most of us have heard the story. Is that, you know, the Rwandans settled as refugees in Cardiff. So that caused a fair bit of tension for many people. And if you were black, you just walked on the street, somebody would hit you on the head and say, go back to your country. We don't want you here. Following Stockport, that increased, significantly. I think also there is this, I don't know what, I think it was former barrister Esther Stanford. She refers to it as Afrophobia, which is a hatred for black-skinned, black-pigmented Africans, and the difference in treatment that some people have narrated in their writing, from mixed heritage to Asians. Do you have a category of hate? Do you have a better experience if you're lighter skinned? You think about during the times of enslavement, people who, white masters who raped their farm workers, had children, mixed race children, and put them in the house and said, you're better than the black ones. And then you got them to tell stories of the black ones who had their feet chopped off and all sorts of horrific horrors visited upon them. So the lighter skinned you are, you're told that that is better for you and life will be better for you. Utter nonsense. There is beauty in our skin color. I mean, I would not want everybody to look like Uzo Iwobi. It would be so boring. It's lovely to look around, see my friends who are mixed heritage, see white people, see Asian people, see Eastern Europeans, and get to know a bit of the world. So Cardiff and Wales is full of absolutely wonderful people. If you came to the Chinese New Year where they brought out the dragons, oh my gosh, it would be last year they dueled the Welsh dragon and the Chinese lion during the New Year festival. It was phenomenal. So there are wonderful stories of excellent good race relations. But I guess in our work, we come across the not so wonderful parts. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Osman Shahs. I'm Oxonian. I grew up here in Oxford. And people don't know that, I've been to places and people don't know there are black people in Oxford. And we got 36 universities, University of Oxford, and we've got Brookes University, who is in Headington, and we always say, that's our university. We've come across the river, all right?
Thank you.
All jokes aside.
Yeah.
You mentioned about race relations. I'm a bit of an older statesman now, so I remember back in the days when Trevor Phillips was on TV,
Yes.
things like that. He was our national hero.
He was.
But in the latter years, he got a position in race relations and things like that, the top of the tree. And I just want to ask you this question. I'll just state that, to me, Trevor Phillips was directly responsible for the destruction of the Race Relation Act. It's knocked us back quite a number of years. It stated that we're no different from the Eastern Europeans, for example. So my hero, Trevor Phillips, and he let us down badly in the end for a knighthood or something like that. So, you know, this is a man we worshipped. He was a black man on TV. which meant a lot to us as well, in a position of responsibility. You may know him. Could you ask him that question? Why? Yeah?
Honestly, my dear brother, I have queried myself some of the statements I've heard him making. I was very alarmed to hear some of them. I was quite shocked because it varied completely from when we worked together at the Commission for Racial Equality. He appointed me. He was on the interview that appointed me as
really?
one of his commissioners. Yeah. And he was so clear in his statements, earlier statements, about the role of systemic and structural racism. He was very clear about the need to eradicate institutional racism. I've been quite alarmed at some of the recent statements. I honestly don't recognize some of what he's saying now. It's changed. Now, Lord Hermanusli has been very consistent. You know, he was also, he was the CRE, one of the CRE leaders, and he has been incredibly powerful and consistent in his message of kick racism out of football. And his recent death has brought all those topics back up again. And for many of us who served as commissioners, have started talking about how race has affected all of us. Why have people's ideologies changed? And to be honest, I'd like to speak to Trevor Phillips myself.
Could you invite me as well?
I think we'll ask Professor Mickey to invite him.
Oh, thank
and
you.
I'll tell him to brace himself. The storm is going to meet him here.
Well, you may not know me, but U-Turn Daily here, he's a person in the community that everybody knows. So if you find U-Turn Daily, you'll find me.
Oh, that's
Right, thank you.
wonderful. Hilton, that's wonderful
Yeah.
to hear about your work. But honestly, I'm so delighted that you've challenged this, because I think we need to be very, very vociferous in calling out what we think is gone wrong. I mean, I look at the Sewell report and I was horrified. I was totally shocked to hear people who are black, who have seen the extent of the devastating impact of racism on black lives, saying that there is no institutional racism. I mean, how can people live with themselves? For what?
I think you've renewed my enthusiasm once again, because he totally destroyed what I believe
Yeah.
a black person achieve and then sell out. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for saying that, speaking your truth. Yeah.
We've got time for one last question just at the back there.
I'll try and make it quick then. But just to reflect, I went to work in Wales in 1983 at a time when it was still very much the tradition that organised labour in Wales was in solidarity with the anti-racist movement. There were great alliances formed, and solidarity was very visible. And I do wonder, reflecting on my time over the following years, how far the fragmentation of the working class, the unified working class of South Wales and other industrial areas has contributed to some unfortunate backward steps. Right, having said that, I'd like to know specifically, as a school governor, what specific work are you promoting in primary schools particularly to make sure the Equality Act works properly and that discrimination is not tolerated?
Thank you so much. Well, just for clarity, Race Council Cymru as a charity is not funded by Welsh Government. So a lot of the anti-racist work that we do as volunteers. There is no grant. And it's because we want to be sure that we're at the forefront of driving change, that we commit our time to do this work. The next thing I want to say is that Welsh Government funded an organization called DARPL, which creates learning resources and works with early learning professionals, teaching professionals. as part of their commitment to the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan, and also as part of their commitment to embedding Black history in school curriculum, they're teaching teachers to be able to teach about Black history and understand better how to address racism in schools. As it happens, I'm holding an online conference, which is free to all schools. I think we've got about 800 people, schools, individuals or lecturers or teachers in schools signed up to an online Teams meeting where I've gathered all the big thinkers like, Professor Emmanuel Bona, first Black professor who chairs the Anti-Racism Wales Action Plan. We've got Professor Charlotte Williams, who worked with government to embed the law about Black history, and the DAPL team. We're all going to address teachers and equip them because they're phoning our helplines to say there's terrible racism. One teacher said to me 5 separate unconnected incidents in the same school involving 4-year-olds. We're terrified. These are children. And nobody's born racist. It is learned behavior. How can we influence parents at home to stop what they're doing to their children? So there is that element of holistic education, adult learning, and getting parents to look at themselves through the mirrors of their children. And whatever learning we are doing now, it has to go back home. It has to begin with adults around children. So DAPL are doing incredible. They've got some guidance documents that they've published. Race Council are producing our own documents, which gives you step-by-step guidance on how you, as a school teacher, can address racist incidents. From the moment a child tells you, somebody called me Black Pooh, a child of 9 said to me, a boy walked up to me and said, your skin is the color of poo, and I bet you smell like poo. I don't want to be near you. And that was a 9-year-old girl. She had tears in her eyes, and I said, you are beautiful. Your skin is the color of chocolate. And everybody loves chocolate. I love to eat chocolate, don't you? She said, yes, I do. But he said poo, not chocolate. So, it's about also finding ways that young people can connect with words. If you go with your big words, nobody understands. Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, those are huge words that, very young people, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, cannot understand. So in Wales, we're creating resources to start them very young, to talk about difference in treatment. What does it mean not to be a silent bystander while bad things are happening to somebody? So those resources are out online. We've also changed or created resources from the stories of the Windrush elders to tell their stories, positive stories of how they came from their countries, how they served the people of Wales, and how young people can learn to serve through the work that they've done. So amplifying good news stories rather than just about enslavement and people in chains and people's teeth being counted before they're sold. So there is a lot of work still to be done, but we are developing our own flowchart for school teachers. DAPL already have theirs out for teacher against teacher racist incidents, and also children, pupils versus pupils, and vice versa. So they've got 4 bits of guidance out, which schools are using in Wales. Thank you. We have one more.
Recently did a play in Oxford, and I encourage some of my friends to go and see it, some of my colleagues.
Yeah.
So I'm one of only Black women in an all-white community organisation.
Yeah.
And I was talking to her today, and she said she went to see the play, and they all felt very uncomfortable. And I was saying to her exactly what you were saying. What do you do with that uncomfortableness? Or it wasn't our ancestors that enslaved the Africans and took them across the Atlantic and wherever, all over the world. But I said, you can be an ally. You can do something about that feeling. So I just wanted to say, and that play was very moving for them. And it can be used as a conversation about, George Floyd and, whatever. So well done, you two.
Well done. You should come to Wales and tell us all about your play. What is the name of the play?
It's called Still Breathing.
Still Breathing. I've heard about that. I've heard about that, the title. That's really wonderful. I'd love to get your contact if okay. Oh, there we go. See, ever ready. Can we take, I'll get your contact. He's ready. He's ready to roll. That's wonderful. I think it's so powerful and important for us to be uncomfortable and to be comfortable with that discomfort because it enables us to grow. I think of a beautiful pearl in an oyster. There's always grains of sand around the pearl that irritates it. And the irritation leads to the shine of the pearl. Without the grains of sand irritating it, the oyster would not be able to produce shiny pearls. So every one of us needs sand in our lives to grate on us and develop, this tenacity, this understanding, this commitment. I do believe that the world can be a better place if we sit with each other in humility and try and learn, to be honest. Try and learn from each other's experiences. I've really embraced my white friends. I've tried, I asked one of the ministers in Welsh Government to mentor me, and he's a white man, because I think I admire his leadership. Little did I know, 6 years later, that he would be the first minister of Wales, and that was Mark Drakeford. This is life, and I came to serve him as a specialist policy advisor. You just never know. It shouldn't be your color that determines. Your attitude determines your altitude. So don't see people through your eyes of color only. Open the doors and learn from everybody, but advance understanding, training, and equity for people who are marginalized. I can't tell you what an honor it has been to be with all of you today. And very soon I'll be running for the train back to Wales. Thank you so much. Diolch yn fawr.